Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for coming. There's a lot of people here. My name is Greg Neagle. I work for Walt Disney Animation Studios in Burbank, California. Lovely, lovely town. Yay, Burbank. I don't know about you, but I have a lot of work to do. I think you probably do too. And you may have been clever and went and found yourself some tools to help you do your job. You know, Puppet or Casper, Absolute Manage, FileWave, or even my favorite tool, Munki. And it helps you with some tasks. You know, there's a lot of software you have to install. And you've gone out and you've found installers for, you know, Photoshop and Office and Firefox. And why is the slide not advancing? Let's go back. There we go. And you use that system then to distribute the software to all of your fleet. So great, you've got that, but you're not done. You know, there's updates. There's always updates. There's lots and lots and lots of updates. So I took a look, and in the last year, I deployed 3 Adobe Reader updates, 4 Microsoft Silverlight updates, 6 VLC updates, 7 Office 2011 updates, 10 Adobe Air updates, 10 Skype updates, 13 Thunderbird updates. See if it catches up with me. 14 Flash Player updates. Not counting yesterday, I haven't deployed that one yet. So what, 17 Firefox updates, 22 Google Chrome updates, and, you know, however many other updates for other pieces of software. So that fills your day, your week, your year. There's a lot of updates. How do you find out about them? You know, you can go search vendor websites. Maybe you go to the Mozilla website to check for new versions of Firefox. You go to the Chrome website to check for new versions of Chrome. But if you look at these pages, there's something missing. So it's not as easy as just going to their web page. You got to kind of dig around and look. Okay, did they release a new one today? No. Okay, I'll check back tomorrow. You may remember a few years ago there was a website called versiontracker.com. And unfortunately, I had to go to the Internet Wayback Machine to see what it looked like a while ago. And you know, you could check it, and it would tell you things like, oh, great, there's a new version of Firefox. There's a new version of a keylogger, a commercial keylogger. Why would you need to know this? But unfortunately, it doesn't look like that anymore. It looks like that. And it's just not quite as useful for finding out about new software. Well, this is the age of social media. Companies they actually have full-time people posting on Twitter about their products and their services, so you can get all excited about what they do to improve your lives. So you figure, okay, I'll use Twitter and I'll check the Firefox feed or the Google Chrome feed or the Adobe Flash Player feed. Maybe I'll find out about updates there. Now, I've looked at those feeds. They don't talk about updates. Of course, I'm not quite sure this is really the correct Adobe Flash Player feed to be looking for. It's very odd. Now, you could just wait. A lot of software, you know, has auto-update mechanisms, and they tell you when there's new software. And if your users, however, are not admins, they may also see this too, but they can't do anything about it. So maybe they just call you up and say, how come you haven't upgraded my machine to the latest version of Firefox? And this has actually happened to me. That's actually one way I did find out about new versions of like some of the Omni products and stuff. Is software manager would call me up and tell me I wasn't doing my job because, you know, he was on 2.3 and there was a 2.4 out and had been out for 3 days. Come on. So it should be really clear that we need some sort of better mechanism, some better tools to help us find and manage updates. It's not something that's getting smaller, it's something that's getting bigger, and updates are very important, especially with security concerns and that sort of thing. We need to keep on top of them. Unfortunately, keeping on top of them is kind of boring. There's a lot of repetitive tasks that you have to do. You've got to find that there is an update. You've got to download them. Often what you download is not really in a deployable format, so you have to somehow change what you've got and transform it into something that you can deploy. And then finally, you have to somehow get it into your software management system so that you can actually deploy it to your machines. So I use Munki, and Munki automates at least the part where I can get the updates out to my fleet of machines, but it's not unique to Munki. You could insert any software distribution system that you happen to use. But you still are left with the problem of how do you get the updates into your software management system in the first place. And so I was thinking, wouldn't it really be nice to have a tool that kind of took that task over, that it could help me find, prepare, and get these updates ready for deployment. And again, that could be any system, it's not Munki specific. So that brings us to AutoPkg. AutoPkg was started by a gentleman named Per Olofsson, who works for the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And about a year ago, when I was looking to automate this for myself, I saw his project. I thought it showed a lot of promise. He had kind of grown less interested in it for some reason. I think his university decided to actually pay a firm to do this sort of thing. So and of course that's a perfectly valid way to do it, is just throw money at the problem and have somebody else do it. I mean, you don't need AutoPkg. You could hire student workers, right? Whatever. But I don't have that option. So I picked up the project and I started running with it and added to it. And I managed to trick some other guy who works at a university in Canada, and he thought it was interesting, and he contributed a bunch to it too. He actually wanted to be here today, but he's got a new young child and wasn't able to get away for this conference. But I'm sure he would like to be here. So you can find AutoPkg on GitHub. A couple URLs there. I'll also post these on my my blog. And I'm sure they'll be in the notes that the slides you will get later in the conference. What does AutoPkg do? It runs recipes. What do recipes do? Well, they can find the latest version of a software item for you. They can download it. They can prepare it for distribution. That might mean packaging, repackaging it, fixing a broken package, that sort of thing. And then at least in the case of Munki and a few other systems, those recipes can import those items into your management system. Very good support for Munki, some beginnings of support for some other systems. So when we talk about packaging or repackaging the downloads, here's some examples of what some existing recipes can do. There's a recipe that can repackage Adobe Air for automated deployment. The current thing that Adobe ships doesn't work at the login window. It can't be used to install Air on the non-boot volume, so you couldn't use it, say, like with Deploy Studio or that sort of thing. There's another one that fixes a broken pre-flight script in the Adobe Reader installer. Another recipe that extracts an actual installer package from the Adobe Flash installer. Do you see a theme there? Adobe. And the weird thing is there are 3 different problems with 3 different things. So Adobe likes to make it challenging multiple ways. Really exercise your skills and your talents. And there's also a recipe that fixes some versioning issues with Adobe's, or with Oracle's Java 7. Every single one of Oracle's Java 7 package releases is version 1.0. All of them. You might think that's a problem, and I think it is too. So using AutoPkg is really simple once you have it installed. You simply say something like AutoPkg run firefox.package. And it runs, it downloads something, and it tells you what it did. If it's a Munki recipe, it might do a little bit more. So AutoPkg run Google Chrome.Munki. It downloaded it, and then it tells me that it imported it into my Munki repo for me. So that sounds interesting. How do I install AutoPkg? Go to the URL, one of the URLs I showed you earlier. There's a lovely download, install the latest installer package link. It's right there. Don't download the source code and then ask me how I compile it. Once you download and install AutoPkg, though, it won't do anything because it doesn't have any recipes. It's an engine, but it needs some recipes. So to do anything useful or interesting, the first step you'll have to do is you have to get some recipes. AutoPkg has a verb called repo add. Recipes are stored in what we call recipe repositories. It's just a grouping. I guess we probably could have used a sexier term like cookbook or something like that, but those are used by other management systems. Every one of these terms is used over and over again. Always very confusing. But these are actually stored as Git repos, so we decided to use the word repo. So you give it the URL to the repo. So if I wanted the basic default recipes that are recommended for use with AutoPkg, I would say AutoPkg repo add, and then the URL to that repo. Most of the repos for recipes are on github.com under the AutoPkg organization, so we've made it so you don't have to type all that stuff, and you can just say AutoPkg repo add recipes, and it's smart enough to go, oh, you mean this longer URL, and it'll find it and download it. So to get the basic set of recipes, AutoPkg repo add recipes. And it will try to git clone those from GitHub, so therefore you have to have Git installed. So if you don't have that installed, you would install either Xcode or the Xcode command line tools, and then that will work for you. It downloads those recipes, puts them somewhere in your home directory, and then adds it to a search path so that AutoPkg knows where to find these recipes. So the core set of recipes contains 51 Munki recipes and 30 package recipes, 30 download recipes. That's a fair number, but there are more. Other people other than Tim and I and Per have worked on recipes, and they've contributed them to the public so that other people can use them. So I can add additional recipes by referring to those other repos. I can add some from Keeley Sam, who in real life is Sam Keeley. And again, I can leave off all that URL stuff at the beginning and just use the end of it. And he had, at least last I checked, there were 37 Munki recipes, 23 download recipes. So how do you find recipes? How do I know where they are? Well, one way is you could just go to the GitHub site, github/AutoPkg, and you can kind of browse, and we can see these different recipe repos. And you can look through them, and you can click on one. Let's say we want to click on Hanson M recipes. And by the way, he's presenting in the room next door. And you go through, oh, you know what, I see down here he's got a fetch recipe, and I need to deploy and fetch and keep it updated. So I click that, and yep, there's a fetch download recipe. Okay, so that's probably what I need. So now I can AutoPkg repo add Hanson N recipes, and all his recipes will be pulled in, and the fetch recipe will be available to me. Well, that's kind of tedious to go through GitHub and clicking through and looking for stuff. It's just kind of tedious. So Tim Sutton recently added this verb to AutoPkg search. And so let's say we were looking for that fetch recipe we wanted, and we can just say AutoPkg search fetch. And it looks through all of the GitHub recipes for us, and it finds a few things that might be of interest. Now, it's fetch anywhere in the description or the name. So I don't actually know that second one, why that showed up. But you can look through what was returned and go, okay, that looks interesting. And that's in that Hanson M recipe, so I could add that. You might notice there's a few others from other people. You could add those, depending on what you needed. And that brings us to variants. Why were there all of those up there? You'll notice that we've got a fetch download recipe, a fetch Munki recipe, a fetch JSS recipe, and a fetch package recipe. And those are just naming conventions that kind of give you a clue what that recipe does. So some recipes may do nothing other than find and download it. Some recipes then convert whatever was downloaded into a deployable package. A Munki recipe imports it into a Munki repo, and a JSS recipe at least does some of the steps to get it into a Casper server. Once you've gotten a whole bunch of recipes, you can ask AutoPkg to list them so you have some idea what you have available to you in case you forget. And the main goal, at least one of my main goals when I started working on the AutoPkg project, was a way of sharing knowledge and process between Mac administrators. There's a lot of knowledge that has to be passed on when we deal with problematic vendors. So if I have to install Adobe Reader and I find out that I can't just use the package as delivered by Adobe, that I have to do something to it, I have to discover what those steps are, and I have to apply those. So with Munki, there's a nice little wiki. Nice is relative. There's a wiki in which we can share some of this information. But somebody who is using Munki has to know that that exists, has to know that there is some documentation on how to fix up Adobe Reader for use with Munki. They have to read the wiki, understand what it says, and then figure out how to implement what was there at their site. There's so many places where communication can just be lost there. And so you end up answering these same questions over and over again. Hey, I'm having trouble deploying Adobe Reader. What do I do? Oh, this is what you do. Can you look at this? Oh, wait, I tried that and that didn't work. Well, try this. And you do this over and over and over again. So much easier to tell that user, hey, how about you install AutoPkg and then just type this? And that takes care of all of that. Somebody has encapsulated all of the logic that is needed to take care of this problem, and now I can, in a very reproducible manner, do this task over and over again and not worry about communication errors, because the computers are really good at doing mundane tasks over and over exactly the same way perfectly. There's a lot of shared knowledge out there now. There's been a lot of adoption from other MacAdmins, and they've contributed a lot of recipes. So as an experiment, a few weeks ago, I repo added every single recipe repo I could find for AutoPkg. And then I decided to find out how many recipes are out there. There's 630 AutoPkg recipes that people have contributed. Now, because I use Munki and Tim uses Munki, the recipes do kind of lean heavily towards Munki recipes. Just out of that count, nearly a third, maybe that's more than a third, my math's not that great, are Munki recipes. The Casper stuff is new, kind of rough. There aren't a lot of Casper-specific recipes yet, but all is not lost. Casper can use standard packages. Absolute Manage can use standard packages. If you're using BigFix, does BigFix use packages? Many of the, if you use ARD, if you're pushing out software via ARD, it can do packages. And there are 95 package recipes. And there's only a package recipe in many cases if what is downloaded isn't usable as is. If what's usable as is, you might even be able to just use the download recipe. There's 258 of those. So even if you don't use Munki, there's a good chance that there's something, hopefully more than one thing, that you can find useful out of AutoPkg. Lots and lots and lots and lots of recipes. So let's talk a bit about the pieces of AutoPkg. It consists of the actual AutoPkg command line tool, a packaging server, and then there are processors, which are the building blocks for recipes. And AutoPkg recipes start with a set of ingredients, which we call the input. Just like a real recipe, you get your ingredients together. And then those ingredients go through a series of steps. We call that the process. Each step in the process passes its output and any unused ingredients to the next step in the process. So let's think of this in terms of human directions. So hopefully, as an admin, you do a lot of documentation. You write down what you do, your processes, so that way you can pass that on to other people in your team. We all do that, right? We're just absolutely religious about documenting our stuff. I do a terrible job at that. But I should do it. And if I were to do it, I might start a little note, you know. Right? This is really important. This is some bit of information that you need to know. Step 1, download the current version of Google Chrome from this URL. Step 2, run Munki import to import it into the Munki server. Done. Okay, those are the steps. That's all a recipe is. It's these steps. Looks very similar. We're going to give it a description, and we're going to say, step 1, use the processor called URL downloader to download this URL. Step 2, use the processor called Munki importer to import what you just downloaded, and here's some flags I want you to set when you import. So conceptually, that's exactly what we're doing. It's the steps that we were going to tell a human to do, but instead we're telling the computer to do it. Now in practice, the recipe doesn't look quite as easy to read as that because we want machines to be able to read it. So recipes are in plist format. And if you're not new to managing OS X, you've almost certainly encountered plist before. So even though they look a little busy, you learn to start ignoring some of the markup and focus in on things. We've got a description here. It tells us that this recipe downloads the latest Google Chrome disk image. Identifier is a unique name for the recipe. We'll get into that a little bit more later. And then the process, which are the steps that the recipe must follow in order to get to our desired effect, starting with a processor step that uses the URL downloader processor to download this URL, and then a Munki importer step that's given some additional input. We've got the package path, the repo subdirectory we're going to upload this to, and sort of a starter package info that contains the catalogs that we want to import it to. And we're also going to mark it and tell Munki that it's okay to install this without bothering the user. So let's look a little bit more at that first step, which has the URL downloader. AutoPkg has another verb, processor info, which we can use it to ask about processors so we can get more information about them. And so if we do AutoPkg processor info URL downloader, we find out that it has an input variable called URL, which is the URL that it's supposed to download, and that one of its output variables is a path name, which is what it downloaded, the result of its action. So in the recipe, it's pretty clear URL is that thing. Maybe less clear is the path name is down here. And you're looking at that and going, well, what's with the funky % characters on either side? What does that mean? Well, that brings us to variable substitution. So the URL downloader, again, has that input, which is a URL, and the output comes out in a path name. And we need some way to get that value that's in the output path name into the input for Munki importer. And Munki importer is looking for something called package path. So we can do that with variable substitution by putting those % signs around the word path name. It knows to substitute the value in there. If those % signs weren't there, it would try to import a file named literally path name. But because those characters are there, we go, oh, you don't mean literally path name, you mean the contents of path name. If this was a shell script, it would look something like that. But the net effect is that value gets copied into the path, or the package path for the next step. So now Munki importer has something to work with. I'm going to import that file, and when it's done, in its output, it sets a couple more variables for us that show us where it imported the package in the repo and where it put the package info. You can do some fancier things with variable substitution. It doesn't have to be just a one-for-one substitution. You can do things the same way you would do with sort of shell substitutions, where I've defined name variable, but now the disk image is going to be named the name plus .disk image. And then once you understand kind of how variable substitution works, that brings us to the input dictionary, which are the initial ingredients in many cases for a recipe. And so in this example here, we've defined two input variables, name and download URL, and then we use them later in the recipe via variable substitution. And you may think, well, why bother doing that? Couldn't you just put those variables directly in the recipe? And the answer is yes, you could do that. But putting them at the top in the input does two things for us. The first thing it does is those may be variables that are most likely to change over time, right? Google could change their download URL at any time. And so it's nice to take those and put them somewhere prominent and easy to find at the beginning of the recipe, rather than having to hunt through the recipe and find what do I need to change. Put that up at the top. And it's very unlikely that a recipe you get from someone else is going to be exactly perfect for your needs. For example, if you're using Munki, perhaps in your Munki repo, this product is not called Google Chrome, it's called just Chrome, or Google space Chrome. And instead of importing it into the apps subdirectory, you're more organized than I am, and you have an applications Google subdirectory for all the Google apps, and that's where you want it to be imported. And your organization doesn't use testing, but instead uses a catalog called unstable for all new products. So this recipe that Greg wrote for dealing with Google Chrome doesn't quite meet your needs. So you could just make a copy of that recipe and change it to do exactly what you need. That's fine, that works. The problem with that is you now own that entire recipe. So let's say Google then changes that download URL in the future. I update the recipe with the new URL, but since you've made your own version of the recipe, you don't get that. You have to also update that recipe for yourself. So there's a feature that kind of avoids that, and we call that recipe overrides. And it allows you to take an existing recipe and override the inputs to meet your needs while still keeping the rest of the recipe, the main recipe. So you can customize a recipe without actually having to change the original recipe. And you do that by typing AutoPkg make override Google Chrome, and it tells you where it saved a file. Open that file in the text editor. Hope you're not too scared of editing plists. But we look at it, and it has the identifier, which we talked about before, and that points to the original recipe. That's how AutoPkg can find the original recipe that you're overriding. And then there's a copy of the input dictionary that we talked about. That we can change. We can change say the name from Google Chrome to just Chrome. We could change the place that is being imported into from apps to application/Google. And we can change the catalogs to unstable. So we've now customized the behavior of that recipe to meet our needs without having to actually change the original recipe. So if the original recipe gets updated, my overrides still take effect, but I also get the benefit of the other admins' work on the recipe. This uses an existing recipe, but starting with slightly different ingredients. The existing recipe is there, and the ingredients that you've changed are here. Oh, now the hands are going up. Yes?
Since in the override it has the Google download URL,
Yep.
if you updated the main recipe but still used the main recipe with your override, would it use the override URL or the main recipe URL for download?
I'm not sure I understand the question. When you,
Well, in the main recipe,
I'll repeat it when I understand it.
well, you have in the main recipe, you have URL downloader as your input, correct?
Yep.
And then in your override, it has the same input in the override.
Right.
If you change the main recipe, do you also have to change the override when the main recipe is changed?
Well, okay. So I think the question is, if the original recipe gets updated and you have an override for it, do you have to change?
Well, because the main recipe and the override have similar input sections.
Correct.
In that example.
Yeah. Well, they have to. In other words, when you create a override, it actually copies the current input dictionary from the original recipe. So at least when you start, they're identical. And now you're modifying the input for your override. Okay, so that part. So now,
So if the main recipe updates, do you have to remake a new override?
no, that's the point of the override. If we update if the main recipe gets updated, the override should still work. Now, the original recipe could be changed dramatically and it won't work, but in most cases, it's going to work fine because the things that you've customized are still being used in the original recipe. If they completely redo the recipe and throw it out, it might not work. But in many cases, and that's like 90% of the point of the overrides, is that we can continue to update recipes without throwing away the customizations that you have made. I think your hand was up first, so you have to wait. Yes. Here comes the microphone.
Oh, okay. So when you create this override, it pulls all the inputs in and overrides all of them. Do you have to override every input?
You don't have to override every input.
So I could choose not to override the download URL.
Correct.
I could just override, say, Munki's package catalog.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how
okay. So that's that. Okay. Now I'm understanding the question. So when we create an override, we don't know in advance which values you are going to want to override. So we just copy everything over.
So
you
we
could
can just delete the lines.
You could delete the lines if you're worried that, yeah. So that's, okay, now I understand the question. Because you've brought the override over in it, yes. Good. That's actually very good. Okay, now I understand the question. Does everybody understand what the question and the answer was there? Let's go back just to clarify that. So when we create an override, it doesn't know which values we're going to want to change, so it copies them all over, including the download URL. And since that's there, if I, in the main recipe, update the download URL, no, it's going to use this one because it's in the override. So that's actually a good kind of best practice, which is change the values you want to change and maybe delete the values you want to use the original of. Yeah, good point. See, we have smart people in this room. That's good. So you can override recipes, but sometimes I'm sorry, I'm barreling on. No, go ahead. Please ask your question.
Just you mentioned working on recipes with a text editor. Does AutoPkg enforce the XML property list format, or is that considered part of the standard?
AutoPkg, that's a good question. AutoPkg, the recipes have to be p-lists. Do they have to be in XML format or could they be binary? I think binary will work fine, although I haven't tested that lately. The code that reads them shouldn't care whether they're binary or XML. So you could use a third-party property list editor. I just always use a text editor, but you could use something else.
Well, mostly you should use a tool aware of that if it is possible.
Yes.
Binary.
Right. Okay. So even though you can override existing recipes, you may run into situations where you have to write your own. Even though there's 600, 700 recipes out there, there may be some product that you need to install, that you need to keep updated, that isn't covered by an existing recipe. So you have to write your own recipe. So we'll give a very simple example so you get the idea what creating a recipe might look like. Let's say your organization has decided that they're going to use the sparrowmail.app. So you go to their website, and you see that there's a download link, and you hover over that, and you find out, oh, there's the download URL that I'm going to go to. And this is really convenient because this particular URL always points to the most recent version of Sparrow. So writing this recipe should be pretty straightforward. But we need to decide what are we going to use? What are the pieces that we're going to use to build this recipe? And if you don't have all the processors memorized, you can type AutoPkg list processors, and it'll give you all the processors it knows about. And you're looking through them and you go, okay, well, maybe that one. I have a URL and I want to download, so that looks good. So let's get some more information about that. And you type AutoPkg processor info URL downloader, and it spits out a whole bunch of stuff, but the description is downloads a URL to the specified download directory, because that's sounding promising. And it requires a URL, and it spits out, among other things, a path name. Okay, so that we saw that already in some of the examples for the Google Chrome downloaders and that sort of thing. So that shouldn't be terribly surprising that the URL downloader is probably the single most used processor in AutoPkg. So let's see what we can do and create a very simple recipe. So here's the plist. We start with a description so we can tell everybody what this recipe is supposed to do. It downloads the latest Sparrow disk image. We give it an identifier. Identifiers simply have to be unique. We've kind of got this convention where if you have a GitHub ID, just use your reverse domain name version of GitHub and then the name of the recipe sort of backwards. Blame all that on Java, that kind of reverse identifier thing. I think Java that first popularized is a strong word, used that. And our process has a single step. It simply uses the URL downloader to download that URL. That's pretty simple. So let's run it. So we type AutoPkg run sparrow.download, processing, and it downloaded something. Well, wait a minute. Well, that's kind of weird. It downloaded download.php. Turns out that the URL processor is really, really stupid when it comes to naming, and it just names things the end of the URL. So I downloaded something from blah, blah, blah /downloads.php, so that's what it named the file. So let's look again at the info for the URL downloader. Oh, look, there's an optional input variable called file name. So instead of saying just name it after the URL, use this name instead. So let's add that to the recipe. So we just add an additional key there and say, okay, download from this URL, but name what you've downloaded sparrow.dimage. So let's run it again. Okay, that looks better. That looks like what we expect. So now we can use the Finder and go to that directory, or we can use the open command, and oh good. So the disk image mounted and it has the expected content. So we did the right thing. Our recipe downloaded a disk image and gave it a reasonable name, and there we go. We could then build on that recipe and do more stuff with it, but that's the beginning of the recipe. We've successfully taught AutoPkg how to download this particular piece of software. So I will admit, AutoPkg is very heavily Munki useful. There's lots of processors that are specifically aimed towards Munki, a lot of recipes, and that's largely because many of us who are writing recipes use Munki, so we write the recipes to solve our particular needs. But if you don't use Munki, all hope is not lost. Alistair Banks, who's presenting right now at this moment in another room, is working on a processor for Jamf to import items into a Jamf server. There's a URL, you can check out his work so far. There's a couple other people that are starting to look at this and offer some suggestions and improvements. So I think this is something that's going to get even better over the next couple of months. Tom Bergen, who is also presenting at this conference, has started work on a absolute manage processor to help get get these things into your absolute managed server if you have one. And the other night at dinner, a little birdie told me that some people here at PSU are working on a processor to get things into Tivoli, Big Fix, that sort of thing. I don't know anything about it other than what I've just told you. So if you're interested, you may want to go bug the people with the red badges and say, what's up with that? And I think James at the back knows a little bit more too. So he has what? But he has an orange badge, so it's that so that way you won't get picked on.
It's actually
Matt knows a lot about it. Matt next door. It's very convenient that Alistair and Matt are presenting at the exact same time, so that they can't be bothered right now. All right. So hopefully by now you've seen at least some advantage to why you might want to be looking at AutoPkg, that it's going to help you do some things that you've been doing manually, repeatedly. But you want to take it a little bit further. You want to automate AutoPkg. And there's some things you can do with that. The first thing is there's a built-in feature in AutoPkg called recipe lists. And those are simply text files. It's just a text file listing all the recipes you want to run. And we also support putting little comment characters, the pound sign in front of it, to say, oh, but don't run these recipes this time, just comment them out. You can put them back in. But that's all they are. There's just a simple text list full of recipes. And you just say AutoPkg run -- recipe list, path to that file, and it goes through and runs all of those recipes in order. So if you have 10 products you want to check for on a regular basis, or 20 products, you can just put them all in a single text file and tell AutoPkg to do all of that. Yes?
If you have previously processed a download and it's in the cache of the repository, it's just a download package, or just a package, and you run the recipes again, and the text version is the same, does it have the ability to skip that download?
So Lisa's question was, if the version hasn't changed and it's already downloaded it, does AutoPkg skip that download and do it again? AutoPkg, not perfect, but it really does try to minimize doing things unnecessarily over and over. So we do store the E tag and the modification date of files, and if it hasn't changed on the server, we don't re-download. When we're building packages, if the version we have is already the same version, we don't rebuild a new package. When we're importing into Munki, if it looks like that item's already been imported into the Munki server, we don't import again. So it is safe to run a recipe over and over again, and it will only do something new if there is something new to be done. So that's good. That brings us to the next thing, which is you then may want to write some sort of script to run your your AutoPkg recipes on a schedule. You could use the recipe list, or you could just put them directly in the script. I find this much harder to read and deal with, but there's some people who prefer this sort of format where they just directly call AutoPkg and pass it all of the recipes they want it to run. But either format is fine. Once you have that script, then you might consider using something like launchd or cron to run that script on a repeating schedule. You could run it every day, every week. I know some people like running it just on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays because they don't want to install new software on Mondays or Fridays. I know there are some people here who run it hourly. Yeah, whatever. So if you're interested in that, a gentleman by the name of Sean Kaiser, who is also at this conference. It's amazing how all these people are here at this conference. He's written a nice little wrapper script that not only helps you run these tools on a regular basis, but parses the output and then can optionally email stuff to you. URL is up there. It's on his blog. So, I mean, automation is great. If you're running AutoPkg every single day or every hour or whatever, it's great. But you probably want to be notified in some way if it did something new or interesting, or if it failed, if something went wrong. So his wrapper script will parse the output of AutoPkg and then email you the results. So you can have this thing run automatically every day, and then you find out, hey, look, I I just downloaded a new version of Flash and imported it into your Munki server for you. Aren't I great? So check that out. It's a great tool. A lot of people are using it. If you really want to get fancy, look at something called Jenkins. Jenkins is known as a continuous integration tool. It was originally written to help with developers doing automatic builds of software. And so based on developers have just checked in a new version of the code, let's run all of the tasks and scripts needed to build this product, make sure that it builds properly without errors, and report back the results of the build. Well, it turns out you can actually use that for other tasks than just building software, because building software is basically just running a bunch of processes or scripts, and that's all we're doing here. So you could set up a Jenkins instance that ran your AutoPkg jobs, and then you get this lovely web front end that tells you when it ran, what was the result of it, is it failing, is it succeeding, all of those sort of things. Now, setting up Jenkins is not trivial. It's something that you know, we could do another session on setting up Jenkins, and we did. If you go to the MacSysAdmin website, you can download a video of a presentation I did last fall, at MacSysAdmin in Sweden. And I talk a little bit more about using Jenkins with AutoPkg in that presentation. Or, there's the URL. All these will be available when you get the slides as well.
Let's all get it right now.
What?
Let's all get it right
Yeah, I'm sure if you all download it right now on the Wi-Fi, that'll fill our time. But Steve Uroff, who is also at this conference, is he here today? Probably watching the. Has written up his notes about how he got AutoPkg and Jenkins working together. And I think this is probably more useful than watching a video which has a lot of hand waving and magic happening. You got, okay. So you can follow him step by step and find out how he did this stuff. All right. So I used to think whenever there was like a patch Tuesday, or I found out that there was a new version of Adobe Flash, my immediate reaction was, now I got to do all this stuff. And since I've been using AutoPkg, a new version of Flash comes out, a new version of Java comes out, a new version of Firefox comes out, and my reaction is nothing, because there is no additional work I have to do anymore. AutoPkg handles this for me. It was always a huge dread for me, especially with, Firefox and Chrome weren't so bad, but most of the Adobe things, I knew I had to do a bunch of steps to get it ready, and I knew sometimes I would get them wrong. And so that's why that reaction, a new version of Flash, a new version of Reader, that's gone. It's just taking that off your plate, something that you don't have to worry about each day, just frees you up to do so many more useful things, like post on Twitter about how great AutoPkg is. My wife is convinced I do nothing at work. Nothing at all. She's a teacher. That's a very easy to understand profession. It's described in a single word. Everybody's had an experience with a teacher. We know what teachers do. And she says, what do you do? I'm a systems engineer. What is that? I work with computers. I make them go. And they pay you for that? What does that involve? It's really hard for me to describe what I do on a day-to-day basis. And to be completely honest, because I've automated a lot of things, I do have some free time here and there. And so she gets very annoyed when I come home and I say, hey, I found this cool thing on the internet. Because she's a teacher. She's spending her entire day up in front of students talking. She doesn't have time to dick around on the internet. She doesn't have time to look for that stuff. And so she's very jealous that I have that time. And with AutoPkg and Munki, now I have even more time to find funny cat videos and all that sort of thing. But It'd be nice if we had a single word that people understood what we did for a living, but I don't think that's a battle we're gonna have. You know. So.
There's a German word actually. I forget what it is right now.
Oh, I'm sure it's a really long word, so that doesn't really help.
It's what they used in the Brazil match. It essentially means pleasure, derives pleasure from other people's pain.
Lovely. Okay. There's like Schadenfreude in there somewhere. Yeah. All right. So hopefully by now I've convinced you in some way that it's worth looking into using AutoPkg in some way, even if you don't use Munki, even if you don't use Casper, that even if you're using ARD, God forbid, which still is a lot of manual work, at least this will take some of that work off your plate. And so you want to learn more about it, because obviously we can't cover even a fraction of what you need to know in an hour session. If you go to the main AutoPkg site on GitHub, there's a wiki which contains some getting started articles, just walking you through some of the initial setup and how you would use AutoPkg. There's a lot of other articles on how to write recipes, how to share recipes. So once you've written a few and you think other people might be able to make use of them, you can share them with others. And then documentation on the various processors that AutoPkg uses as part of its steps. I write occasionally for MacTech magazine, and towards the end of 2013, I wrote a couple introductory articles on AutoPkg, and then at the beginning of the year, I wrote a few on creating custom processors. So that's something we didn't go into at all, but recipes make use of processors for each step. Processors know how to do a particular task. It's possible, depending on what software you need to get into AutoPkg or into your management system, it's possible that the existing processors may not cover everything you need to do. It is possible to write additional processors in Python to do those additional tasks. And that's what Alistair is doing with the JSS processor. That's what Tom Bergen is doing with the Absolute Manage processor. And there are other people that have written specific processors to work around particular vendors. So that's, if you want to learn a little bit about that, that's in MacTech. MacTech, you can subscribe to print. You can also buy individual copies of the magazine on the iPad. So if you don't want to get the entire thing, you can go back and find the issues that the AutoPkg articles are in and just buy those. They're like $5 an issue, and you can read them on an iPad. If you don't have an iPad, buy an iPad. That's AutoPkg. There's the people. There's the website you want to look at. And we've got time for questions. So let's wait for the microphone to run down, and let's go here first.
Okay, so this is great. A quick question. Part of this seems to be based on an assumption that I think is generally true, that, of course, the way these packages might be repackaged or the way they might be messed up and therefore need fixing will remain consistent going forward. Mm-hmm. And I know, at least on the Windows side of the thing with MSIs, that's how things tend to go. There has to be some validation, I assume, you're doing before you push these things into production. How much of a workflow does that generally entail?
Okay. It's a very good question. I don't solve that problem inside of AutoPkg. I solve that problem inside of Munki. Munki has a very easy to use workflow where you can import new stuff into a testing group, and only a small number of machines, perhaps, the way you can configure it any way you want, but perhaps only a small number of machines then get that new package. So if something has gone wrong, if the repackaging has done something horrible, you only break 2 or 3 or 4 machines. You don't break your whole fleet. So you import into that testing, make sure things are fine, and then later you promote it from testing to, say, production, and now it goes out to your whole fleet. So that's not solved within AutoPkg, it's solved within Munki. But the first part of your question, the assumption that the packages are broken the same way forever, certainly that is the assumption. It often fails. The Adobe Flash recipe has changed dramatically over the last year because when we were first writing the recipes, the Flash installer was much more broken than it is now. And so we actually had to repackage the package because it wouldn't install at the login window, it would not install to external volumes, and so we were doing a lot of work there. Well, they fixed it more. I mean, it's much better than it was, and so we dramatically changed the recipe and tore all that out. You can't know in advance. Sometimes you can know in advance, but you can't know in advance when the vendor is going to either make it better or make it worse. So the recipe writers have to just react to that. And that's actually one of the reasons people are kind of confused by the recipe sharing model that we have. The reason why we have multiple recipe repos is we really want the original author of the recipe to continue to have ownership of that. And so credit and blame, as it may be, right? But we figured they're the people that are most likely motivated to make sure it continues to work. So if I don't use, Whiz-Bang app, so I'm not motivated to make sure the Whiz-Bang app download recipe always works. But if you wrote that recipe and contributed it, you probably use it, you're more likely to notice the problem and be motivated to fix it. And in practice, over the last year, we found that's worked really well, that the original recipe authors are really good about maintaining their recipes because they use them. It affects them directly. They're motivated to fix the problem, and they usually fix them very quickly. Next question.
Just real quick, Greg. You mentioned part of automation that you can draw from a recipe list, and based on that, I wasn't paying close enough attention to know whether that was something that I would have to do in a text editor, or something that is generated automatically. By
if you build your own recipe list.
That's all.
Right,
Okay,
because
thanks.
there's, if you download all of the recipe repos, what do we say, there were 600 some recipes, you probably aren't interested in all 600 some products. So so it's just a plain text file. You say, these are the 20 or 30 recipes I'm interested in, run these. So you don't have to run them one at a time. You can run 20 of them at a time.
Hey, Greg. First of all, thank you for your work on this. It's great. It saves save our butt a lot of times and stuff. And then, a lot of us may come from the programming world and understand GitHub and those kinds of things. And you were talking about recipes. And does AutoPkg have any idea of, we version software pretty clearly. So you were talking about just in the previous example, and nobody ever has to go back to those old days where they redeploy to macOS 10.7 or something, but it would be kind of interesting if there was some concept of versioning on those recipes. Is that already there and we're just not talking about it, or is that something that's an opportunity?
That's an opportunity. We've actually talked about it internally, somehow keeping track of the recipe versions so that maybe you could say lock down on a specific version, right? But we haven't done anything with that. The only versioning aware thing is that recipes can declare that they require at least a certain version of the AutoPkg tool. So as more capabilities are added to AutoPkg, recipes can take advantage of them, but a recipe can signal, hey, in order to run, you need to upgrade to at least AutoPkg something. But we have talked about how can we better handle the versioning stuff in recipes themselves, but we haven't done much with it, but two, it's because so far there hasn't been a really strong need. And as we're all super busy and we tend to solve the actual problems we have and not the theoretical problems we might have down the road. Might that bite us in the future? Maybe, but it's a choice we've made so far.
Okay, and quick follow-on is, so if I'm a vendor, I'd probably be embarrassed that we're all here in this session's pack jammed because we're having to refix their tools. Has anybody heard from, even smaller vendors or whatever that said, hey, we're interested in trying to give you a consistent URL download for your engines, or is there any interest on that side?
Well, it's interesting you say that. If you look at the recipes that have to actually repackage or redo things, they're not the ones from small vendors. They're the ones from the big vendors, right? And they're the ones that cause the most pain because, if foo app that only 3 people use requires repackaging, you never hear about it because nobody's complaining about it. But you hear about the Adobe stuff because everybody, whether they like it or not, is probably using Flash at least. They're probably getting heavy pressure to install Reader, even though Preview can do 99% of what Reader does. And if you have any artistic people at all, you're dealing with the Photoshop and all the CS apps. So it's a really, really common problem. And Adobe has been very inconsistent about the quality of their installation packages forever. And it's gotten better over time. Certain products have gotten better faster than others. And all we can do is continue to feed back to Adobe how much trouble that causes, and hopefully it does improve over time. But none of us can wait for Adobe to fix those things, so we have to come up with these sorts of fixes ourselves. But the nice thing is with something like AutoPkg, that fix can be consistent. The way I fix it, everybody can use. They don't have to rediscover, oh, I do this and that sort of thing. So hopefully that's useful, that knowledge, that discovery that one of us does can be used by more than one person in a consistent way. Yes?
So I've got a question about, you can have a recipe that either downloads your package or that imports your package into Munki. Can you have a single recipe that can import to multiple places? Say I have, completely theoretically, a Deploy Studio server that I want to always have installing completely up-to-date packages for certain things right out of the box, regardless of when they hit my Munki server. But I also want that same package to go to my Munki server for all the stuff I'm not imaging at the moment. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it would absolutely be possible. That's actually a really good idea for somebody to write a Deploy Studio processor. It probably wouldn't even have to be a processor, really. It's just a file copy. So yeah, you could have it import into your Munki server and also copy that package to the packages directory on your Deploy Studio server. One of the things I didn't cover, and it's related to recipe overrides, is you saw download recipes, package recipes, Munki recipes. They can inherit from each other. A package recipe can declare that a download recipe is its parent. So that means the download recipe kind of runs first, and then it takes the output from that and packages it. And now the Munki recipe can declare the package recipe as its parent, so you could then write a copy to Deploy Studio recipe that, so you could actually get the functionality you wanted without having to write a whole new recipe. You just write the additional stuff that you need to do. And yes, so absolutely you could do what you want.
Thank you.
Do you know if anybody's set up any recipes for software that requires serial numbers on the updates?
That's a very good question. The publicly available recipes are all for stuff that doesn't require those sorts of things, because that's the only thing that you can share. I can't share a recipe that inserts my serial number into the package with you.
Oh, I'm thinking of just pulling from a table or something.
Yeah. But absolutely you could write your own recipes that did that sort of thing. Those are just ones that we haven't really thought about how would you generalize those in a way that they would be shareable.
I'm just wondering if of the 600 you have, do you know of any that do anything like that?
I'm not aware of any that do those. The software that I have that acts like that, for example, I have a bunch of Omni group applications, and those all require licensing. The nice thing is that they only have to be licensed once, right? So when I install OmniGraffle, I also install a package that installs the licensing for it. I can then install the upgrades over time. It doesn't matter. I don't have to reinstall the licensing. So the licensing in that particular instance really has nothing to do with the update mechanism. So I haven't really found a need yet to manage that. Even the update request. And so that might be a slightly different question. There are certainly, we have to go find downloads and download them. There are vendors who protect those downloads behind, a login page or that sort of thing. And I am aware of people who have written recipes to get, to go through those. But again, those aren't ones that you can easily publicly share because you've probably embedded your own credentials to get through that. I kind of feel like Jeremy Richmond has a few recipes like that. So if you're interested, he's at this conference. If you're interested, bug him. You got the mic?
Yeah, I think it's important to note as a best practice not to run AutoPkg with sudo.
That's a really good point. So AutoPkg has several components. One is the command line tool, and one is a packaging server. The packaging server runs as root. So it knows how to package. You need to kind of be root to do packaging. And it's a very common mistake because people are used to having to do that. They try to run AutoPkg as root using sudo, and they get really unexpected results. No, AutoPkg is designed, you're supposed to run it as a normal, unprivileged user, and then it talks to the packaging server for anything it needs to do that requires elevated privileges. Thank you. All right, the room is settled down. We've got about 10 minutes, so you can have extra time to go get refreshments. I'm going to stick around, so if you have a question you didn't want to ask in front of everyone and you just want to talk to me privately, that's cool. Thank you.